ha-gibarim, the mighty ones. And now where the confusion starts to set in is when this Hebrew passage was translated into the Greek in the Septuagint, the word they used for the Nephilim was gigantes. It sounds like giants, and it turns out they were giants, but that's not what the word means. Gigantes comes from gigas, which means earthborn. So in the Hebrew they're called the fallen ones. In the Greek they're called the earthborn. And so let's keep that in mind. The fact that they were giants is like a pun. Yes, they were giants, but that's not what the word means. It carries a different meaning. Let's go on a little further in verse 9 of Genesis 6. It says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Terrific verse. We've all read it. But most of us may not pay attention to what that's really saying. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. What does that mean? Well, the word perfect in the Hebrew is tamim. What it means is without blemish, sound, healthful, without spot, unimpaired. What that verse seems to indicate is that Noah's genealogy was unblemished. Now this comes on right after the verses that talk about these strange goings on, where these fallen angels have created some weird form of hybrid, but Noah was unblemished in his generations, and that's one of the reasons that God chose Noah and his 3 sons and their 4 wives to start over again. The purpose of the flood was not just that there was sin in the land. There was, and that's emphasized. But if sin brings the flood, we better get some life jackets. No, there's something far deeper going on. That's what I want to sensitize you for when you do your own study and come to your own conclusions. But I want you to recognize there's something much more profound that God is a problem that God was solving, and that is that Satan's strategy was to contaminate the human race. Now, by the way, if this view is correct, I'm presenting to you what's sometimes called the angel view of Genesis 6. That is not taught in most seminaries, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But if that view is correct, as I've suggested from the exegesis of the Hebrew in Genesis 6, it will be confirmed in the New Testament, at least twice, and it is. When you get to the book of Jude, Jude makes an allusion to this very event in Jude verses 6 and 7. Jude is just one chapter, but in verses 6 and 7, Jude writes, and the angels, and by the way, this is in the Greek, so it's not ambiguous, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of that great day, even as Sodom and Gomorrah, and the cities about them in like manner giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Jude is talking about judgment on the bad guys. And he mentions among these things, these angels which sinned back in Genesis 6. These angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains. These angels that participated in Genesis 6 apparently are chained, awaiting a special judgment. We'll talk. Peter's going to talk about that in a minute. And Jude adds something else here. He makes a comparison between the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah and the sins of these angels, in that they were doing that which is unnatural. Sodom and Gomorrah, homosexuality. We're all familiar with that. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. He's using that as an additional exemplar, lumping the angels with them. The angels went after strange flesh, so did Sodom and Gomorrah. They're both reserved for special judgment. You follow me? You can read it, check it out yourself. That's one confirmation. That's in Jude. Let's take a look at, see, they left their own habitation. We're going to come back to that in a minute. And going after strange flesh is the allusion here. Let's turn to 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. 2 Peter, in Peter's second letter, he says, for if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus, it's translated hell in your English Bible, but the Greek word is Tartarus, and it's the only place that word appears in the Bible. I'll come back to that. If God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, and he goes on. So Peter does a couple of things here. He again alludes to the angels that sinned. They're cast into Tartarus. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And they're reserved for a final judgment. And spared not the old world, but saved Noah. In other words, he ties that event to the days of Noah. So he not only confirms Genesis 6, but he also links it to the days of Noah. Okay. The word Tartarus deserves some comment. The problem with this word is it doesn't appear anywhere else in the Bible, but it does appear in Greek literature. It's the Greek term for the dark abode of woe. It is the pit of darkness in the unseen world. It shows up, for example, in Homer's Iliad, where Tartarus is as far below Hades as the earth is below heaven. So where's Tartarus? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. So Tartarus was a term for a deep, special, it was regarded as far below Hades as the earth is below heaven. So it's where these angels are chained until the final thing. Now, if you study classic Greek mythology, you run into the Titans. These creatures in the legends and the myths were partly terrestrial and partly celestial. They rebelled against their father Uranus, and after a prolonged contest were defeated by Zeus and condemned where? Into Tartarus. Do you see a parallel brewing here? I'm going to suggest to you that the legends of the ancient Greeks embody the truth of what really happened in the past, that there were these strange creatures generating hybrids that the Greek called Titans. And we see Zeus in many forms. We see Atlas and Hercules. Atlas and Hercules from Greek mythology were what would be called in the Hebrew Nephilim, offspring of an intermarriage between a god and a woman. And so now these legends we obviously see in the Sumer culture, in Assyria, in Egypt. I'll show you a few things. In the Incas, the Mayan, the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the Persian mythology, and certainly in the Greek mythology, which most of us as products of Western civilization are familiar with. Also in India, Bolivia, South Sea Islands. Every one of these cultures, and the American Indians, every one of these cultures have legends of the star people. These people that came, these gods or demigods, whatever, came and cohabited with women and produced hybrids. I discover from some apparent experts in the American Indian culture that this business of holding a hand up saying how, that's Hollywood. But what apparently was the practice when they met a stranger was to hold up the hand so they could count fingers. They had a terror of the six-fingered people. And if you go to the ruins at Chaca, New Mexico, they have one of the exhibits there that you want to take a look at, with famous pictographs. And among those pictographs you'll find the fearsome six-fingered hand as part of that. I came across something else that's kind of, the Pawnee Indians have an account that you remember Buffalo Bill? Real name was William Cody. He wrote his autobiography in 1920. Very colorful guy. You can get his book, it's popular. But there's an interesting quote in his book by Buffalo Bill, Bill Cody, published in 1920. He says, while we were in the Sandhills scouting the Niobrara country, the Pawnee Indians brought into camp some very large bones, one of which the surgeon of the expedition pronounced to be the thigh bone of a human being. The Indians said the bones were those of a race of people who long ago had lived in that country. They said these people were 3 times the size of a man of the present day. And they were so swift and strong that they could run by the side of a buffalo and taking the animal in one arm could tear off a leg and eat it as they ran. I don't know what to make of that. It's in his autobiography. It's published in 1920. I don't think he was worried about UFOs and stuff, but it is a interesting allusion to the Indian legends. In the early country, Ashur, they always speak of the flying god of Ashur. And this diagram you see in many, many of the ancient monuments of a man with a bow, like Nimrod perhaps, and the wings. And you see this on the monuments. Here's an example of them. As you go through